I am DM Zone. This is Gamers Oasis. Let's get into it. Okay, there are two things that you need to know about this class real quickly before I jump into the Thief class that are outside the class that are actually very specific and important to this class. First is that the Thief class was not actually made by the founders of TSR. It was not an idea that came from them. So when they made the original rules in 1974, there was no Thief class. That means that everything the Thief did was still in the game. It just wasn't necessarily being done by the Thief. So when they added the Thief class, what did the Thief add that could not already be done by anyone else? As legend goes, and discussed in several interviews actually with Gygax and with other people, and wrote in several books on the D&D history, it was stated that Gary Gygax talked about he had a long interaction, phone call type of thing that he often had with his fans and players talking about the game. In the Great Plains Game Players Newsletter number 9, that's a mouthful, he talks specifically about how a Mr. Gary Schweitzer from Aero Hobbies in Santa Monica, California, kind of brought forth this concept of the Thief, which, as a character would imagine, it sounds very sword and sorcery. I could imagine more of a Conan the Barbarian type of thief being introduced initially. It kind of has grown into different things since then, but that's kind of where the thief came from. I'll get more into what the other thing is in a little bit, because the Greyhawk, the book where this came from, was wrote in 1975, a full calendar year later. The mechanics of the thief were not in the original rules. Therefore, when you're trying to mix them, they don't necessarily match up perfectly. They're pretty good, they're passable, but there's definitely some things that are different. However, that being said, the thief instantly became one of the most important things added to the game. I would say class, but how it was used was different than just as a class. You see, fighter, the fighting man, was the unit of measure for a lot of things when you are trying to talk about how tough an orc is, or a goblin is, or whatever, or a unit of soldiers. You'd use X number of fighting men. Now, thief was often interchanged with that to show that this is not a strong fighting class. This is maybe a more of a scout class. You'd see this in like bugbears and this type of stuff, where you would have maybe a dichotomy of two different types of bugbears or goblins and this type of thing. And that changed the landscape of a lot of things, because you couldn't use a cleric because that indicates magical casting of like divine spells, and you couldn't use a magic user because that indicates a magical cast of arcane spells, and a unit of measure of halfling would only come up to a certain bar. That's kind of a low joke, I'm sorry. I'm probably going to take a few videos to talk about how Supplement 1 adjusted and changed original Dungeons and Dragons, because there is so much in there, and the thief stuff is part of it, that it would make this video just too long to try and talk about it here, and it's outside the scope of this video. So let's get into the mechanics of the game. The first thing we learn is that thieves are either neutral or chaotic. They are restricted to magical daggers and magical swords. It didn't say that thieves couldn't be lawful. It just kind of really wanted an excuse for why they were. They can use all weapons except for, shields, of course. They can only use the magical daggers and swords. They can wear leather armor, and while they can't learn spells themselves, at 10th level, they can start to read scrolls and cast magic as if they were a magic user. Thieves can be humans. They can be dwarf fighters. Thieves. They can be dwarf fighter thieves. This would be like one of the first true multi-classes that came out, unlike the original elf, which picked which one it is. They were kind of both at the same time, is the way it feels to me. Speaking of elves, though, they could become fighter, magic user, thieves. And there is a section in the book where it talked about that elves could take their magic user side and rotate that out and make themselves clerics. Therefore, by my understanding at least, you should be able to become a fighter cleric thief. Now, dividing these classes 3 ways makes it a lot harder and kind of throws a lot of mud onto what the elf is, much like several other things in this rules. They could have spent more time clarifying what that meant. The one who really benefited the most from this, though, is halflings. Halflings could be thieves themselves, or they could be a fighter. The main benefit of a halfling thief, though, is they have no level restrictions and no more capping themselves at level 4. Now, ironically, I do believe that they should be able to go all the way up to 4th level fighting man or fighter, and then by using the rules in the first book, rotate over to become a thief and then spend the rest of their levels as a thief. Now, why that is interesting is that would be the first use of what we consider a dual class, which came out actually in AD&D. So maybe that was the first root of that type of thing actually existing. Now, strangely enough, elves can be thieves, but half-elves can't. So even though the human side can, the combination of these two apparently cannot. And I don't know if they just felt like it was too much power for what might be an improvement on the elf race just because it's got the human side to it. I don't know why this choice was made. I will dive more into the half-elf race in a future video because it's certainly worth talking about. So dexterity is a prime requisite for a thief. This is obviously benefits them by raising their dexterity. Oddly enough, and I'll get into this in other videos, it has a different mechanic for raising the dexterity. It actually pulls from 2 stats, not from a stat, which is different than any of the other statistics. Dexterity in this book is starting to get some additional benefits. It now has bonuses to range weapons. It increases your AC. If you were a fighter, like maybe as in the potential of a dwarf or a halfling that went fighter first, you could go ahead and get the ability to dodge and parry attacks by having an increased dexterity that fighter only get. I guess elves would fall in that category too, potentially, but then I think you're supposed to choose which version of the elf you're playing, even still with a tri-class. Having a higher dexterity raises the thief's AC. It doesn't actually make them what I would consider a high AC class. Their leather armor restriction is very severe in this version of the game. One of the biggest things that really says thief is the ability to backstab. In original Dungeons & Dragons, it's literally silently attacking from behind. Modern day has changed this into different things. We have flanking and all sorts of assistance and this type of stuff. And while I like those, this version of the game doesn't necessarily have that. In this edition of the game, the element of stealth is required for the backstab. The positioning is probably the more important thing in my opinion. And if a magic user were to cast like silent 15-foot radius on the area, I think that would be qualifying, at least for the first attack. The main benefit I think they're trying to get at is they don't want you to backstab, round after round after round. Coming from the silence is what should be the shocking part of the whole thing. It's supposed to be like a surprise. If you do that magically or you do that naturally, I think that part doesn't matter. So if you cast silence on a coin, as long as they get to the rear position to get their first attack at least with a backstab. Depending on which system you're using, you would get benefits for the backstab. Using the alternative combat system, the attacker gets +4 bonus. This part of the statistic is static. It doesn't change. It doesn't scale with level. The second bonus is that you get double damage from 1st to 4th level. And from 5th to 8th level, you get triple damage and so on. And that scales up as you go up in levels. If you're not using the alternative combat system, you're treated as a cleric for combat. That means you can then use the chainmail rules to figure out how you fall in with the combat ability. Thieves also have basic abilities. These basic abilities are a bit in conflict, as in, I've talked about this already, that they were things that could already be done in the rules. All these things were done by non-thief classes before, and now the thief has come in saying, I'm a specialist at these things. There could have been more wrote to discuss this, how these worked and how the crossover was supposed to actually be, and as part of the contention to why people wonder what exactly the thief brings to the class. The way I view it is, this is yes and. So, yes, you can climb a wall, but the thief can do it faster and better. Let me break this down a little bit. The actual thief abilities that I'm talking about are open locks, remove traps, hear noise, move silent, pickpockets, hide in shadow, and climb. So what's the benefit of open locks? Well, it's quiet. If you're a fighter trying to open a locked chest, you have the ability to carry it out, or you can bust the lock there and find out what's inside it. However, when you bust a lock, you're going to make noise. And while you might not need a hear noise check to hear a lock being busted in the next room, if the thief is picking the lock, you probably need a hear noise to be able to hear that. Therefore, you can access the noble's locked chest while you're inside the bedroom of the noble or whatever, and the noble in the next room may or may not hear you actually accessing the lock. Whereas if you bust the lock, everyone hears you. Remove traps is something that a clever adventurer could do. You know, take a 10-foot pole, poke and prod, dump a bucket of water out to see if there's a pit trap in front of you, throw sand in the air to see if you see any wires, this type of stuff. However, once you get it, how you disarm it is kind of like hit or miss. Do you use a mirror? Do you look around the corner? Are you in the range of the thing? With a thief, their ability to disarm the trap or find the trap is not requiring gimmicks or mechanics that are, while they are within the game, they require resources. They require that you might be in the space when it happens. The thief just kind of does, and that's the important part of that. I would also say that they probably are less likely to hurt themselves in the process. Also, throughout all of these, there's nothing that says I just can't go. I failed to remove the trap as a thief. Now I'm going to take a 10-foot pole and ram it into the floor until the floor gives, and now we know where the 10-foot pit is. You can always go back to the cleverness of an adventurer if the thief side fails. Now, the hear noise literally piggybacks on the same system, and I wish this was probably closer to how the rest of these things were initially. However, there was no specific mechanic for most of these other things initially. Therefore, all these things were kind of like referee decisions at the table. So this is the only one that I actually had a prior system to work off of. The main difference between a thief and a non-thief in this situation is that the thief scales. Also, halfling thieves get an initial bonus of +1. Therefore, they always start out better. So because they're not human, they start off with a 2 in 6 chance of being able to hear noise. Well, as a halfling thief, they get a 3 in 6 chance. This also means that they can take this beyond a 6. If your hear noise is a 6 in 6 chance, you cannot fail. 6s and 1s do not automatically succeed or fail. So this is where I talk about hearing in 3D or being able to see sound, this type of thing in other videos. Now we're going to jump into something that's a little bit harder to define for some people or wrap their head around. There is move silent and there's hide in shadows. And while these are both separate skills, and they actually literally put pickpockets in between them as if that was not clear enough, they really want to make sure you understand these are different. Many feel like they are the same, but the difference is move silent is literally the movement and you can be seen. Hide in shadows means you can hide. And I'll get to hide in shadows more in a specific. But what's the difference between quietly moving, which anyone can basically do by taking precautions and being clever, and a thief that is moving silent? Well, the difference is if the ogre is rolling hear noise to see if it can hear you move, if you're moving quietly, there's a chance that they can hear you move. If you're a thief moving silent, they cannot hear you. Now, if you're a thief moving silent or trying to, and you fail to move silent, it doesn't mean that you are now loud. What it means is that now the ogre has a chance to hear you move because you're not moving silent, but you are moving quiet. And that is the main distinction between move silent and just trying to move quiet. Now let's talk about the hide in shadows more. So if you're not a thief, you require basically concealment or cover to be able to hide. This really includes the halfling too, but the halfling in the wilderness kind of has a benefit that is as close to hide in shadows as one could get. There's nothing that specifically says that they have to put the bush between you and the enemy to hide. It basically says they can just hide in the wilderness easier. Okay, but what the thief can do is a thief can hide directly in the shadows. That means they meld and fade away. They don't need the concealment and the cover. They can be literally in the same room with you using only the shadows to hide. That means that their ability to be able to move silent to get a backstab off is the thing that makes them so different. Now finally, we're going to jump into pickpockets. It was designed to felch items, which doesn't necessarily mean just to take them. It also means you could put items back. This could be something like the Indiana Jones movie where you switch into idol in the weighted bag. This also could be you want to put some sort of item on a person so you can track them or incriminate them later. Your mileage might vary. This is also one of the few, if not the only ability in original Dungeons & Dragons that was compared directly against the target's level. Now, it's not your level versus my level, but what it is for every level above 5th, you add a -5 to the attempt. Therefore, a 10th level target would add a -25 to the thief's pickpocket ability, making it harder for them to be able to pick a higher level character's pocket. I could also see that if there is some sort of awareness or some sort of distraction, there could be bonuses within there. Since we're going to be doing bonuses, positive and negative, I could definitely see those as a thing, and that is all the way up and down the thief list, in my opinion. The last of the ability, and certainly not the least, is the ability to climb sheer surfaces both up and down. And this is without gear, but a clever adventurer could manage this on their own to some degree. Technically, they could climb walls, but I think that has a lot more to do with word creep and the changing of the phrasing of things, probably an editorial thing, than the actual changing of the rules. However, that being said, that is not the only thing thieves can do. As they level up, depending on where you read it in the book, because it is listed in 2 places differently, thieves have an 80% chance to understand the written language. They can read and they can write in it. They do not have the ability to speak it or understand the spoken language, but they do have the ability to read and write it. Now, while I'm right here, Thief Can't is not a thing in original Dungeons & Dragons, though I feel like it's a great fit and it probably should be a thing within this version of the game. At 10th level, this ability to read extends to scrolls, and they're able to start casting spells off of a scroll. They are limited to magic user and only, and I would say probably the illusionist, but I'll talk about the illusionist spells more in a future video when I actually go into that. My reasoning for the wording I use here is because I believe it's not necessarily a mechanic of the game as much as it would be the source of the game. I would say a druid's source is going to be divine, whether it's arcane spells, which is not technically even a thing that's said in the original Dungeons & Dragons, or if it's a divine side. I would say the magic user side of things is what allows that to be there. And I don't think that the illusionist has anything specific that says that it comes from a divine-like source. Also, there's a 10% chance that any spell above 7th level could be cast in the inverse than what was intended to be cast. One of the last things to get to before we talk about XP is that thieves save as magic users. This was not clearly stated in the Supplement 1 book other than just saying that, so we'll base that off of how they are in the original book. The biggest benefit of a thief probably would be that they are the lowest XP to level. Their hit points are also a D4, which is a bit of a bummer, but being higher level does mean that you get more benefits than just than HP alone. Higher level is not strictly defined as by hit points. As a thief, regardless of how many hit points they have really doesn't want to be hit in the first place. So when I was going through my research, I ran into several people asking questions. They weren't asking me specifically, they were asking other people, and people were responding. Some of those questions is, if the game was made without the mechanic, their special abilities, what's the point of having them? And I would say yes, like I have said before. If the game was made without a thief, why are any of their special abilities different than what everyone else can do? And I would answer with yes, that is true. But I do not see the mechanics of their abilities as a yes only. I see it as a yes and. So they have their ability to do their thief stuff, and if they fail it, then they can still act as an adventurer. Later, Gygax actually referred to these abilities as being nearly mystical or magical in nature. Another person said, why are thief abilities so bad at lower levels and so good at higher levels? I would say yes, the first part is definitely very true. It's very tough. When you're lower level, it's tough to get your thief ability, and you kind of feel like you're not contributing anything to the game. If I had my desire in this, I would continue on with the yes and I would not have the thief abilities scale as fast and as far. And I would play a lot more with modifiers in the game that would allow clever play, because I like to encourage clever play in my game. And I would treat succeeding at a thief ability as more of a critical success or a perk, and then have that blend more naturally with the natural ability of a adventurer to do adventurer stuff. Talking about how climb walls, inclined surfaces, the short answer is word creep. In some places it says that it can climb sheer surfaces. It says that it can climb walls. I think the bigger thing to focus on in here is it really doesn't cover in any of the rule books fall damage. It talks a little bit about in book 3 in the Underworld and Wilderness section that it refers back to chainmail and boarding ships. And it gets a little bit complicated and doesn't translate directly well. In there it says that you have a 1 in 6 chance of taking a hit. Now, mind you, in chainmail, taking a hit meant that you were killed. This 1 in 6 chance is increased by 1 every 10 feet. Therefore, if you're falling from a 40-foot fall, you would take a 4 in 6 chance to get a hit. In chainmail, that would kill you outright. And while it doesn't make sense in the original Dungeons & Dragons, it does say that there's a 32% chance you would not take any damage at all. And again, that's not in the spirit of original Dungeons & Dragons. Now, in a different portion of the book, it talked about the fact that if you take a hit, and this is, mind you, talking about combat, it would actually do a d6 damage. So the way I interpret this in my game is that for every 10 feet you fall, you take a d6 damage. However, I would give you a dexterity save ability to land in a certain way that would prevent the complete fall damage. So 4d6 save for half if you fall from a 40-foot cliff or off a 40-foot wall. If you're landing on water, I would say it's every 20 feet. If you're falling in jagged rocks, I would say you probably get a -2 to your save. I think that hits the tone with it. And I realize that's not necessarily answering the question that was asked, but I think word creep is the big thing there. Open locks is one of those things that they have to wait to level on to get higher. If you fail, you only get 1 chance per level. And I think that's a terrible mechanic for the game. I understand kind of what they're doing. I think, though, if you were to take 20 minutes while you're in the dungeon to try and refocus, I'd give them another chance. Everyone is not perfect. They're going to make mistakes. The 20 minutes means they're probably going to have a wandering monster. If they're willing to trade a wandering monster check to try and reopen that trap, or to disarm the trap, or to open that chest while they're in a dungeon, or the thief is over there toying with the chest, trying to open it while everyone else is resting, I think that fits the threshold of what I would want for a cost in this game. It also falls in that clever rule that I like to have, where you seek clever play. A lot of people were asking about, are there any modifiers to thief abilities. You have a lot for combat, you have a lot in other ways. Why would there not be anything for thieves? And I would say they're completely right. I think that you have to kind of focus on specific things. You don't want to make low level stuff so gonzo that doesn't matter when you get a certain level of ability and you're taking it way past 100%. However, if the party kind of wants to do like an Ocean's 11 type of distraction and misdirection type of thing, I fall into the clever play on this, and I could definitely see and have a +10 to +20 ability. Again, also remembering that it's a yes and with the perks type of thing, so that if they are successful, they do get it, and if they're not successful, it doesn't mean they automatically fail. Some people wondered if dwarves and elves could find certain traps than other types of thieves. The short answer is it's not really covered in the rules. The rules are silent on this. However, I like the concept of it myself, and personally as a referee, I would go ahead and give the dwarves and elves certain checks or benefits, and then if they failed that, the yes and would allow them to still sense secret hidden doors and this type of stuff that the trap or whatever might represent, or the fresh construction might represent, making them naturally just a little bit better. So in closing, how do I do it? Personally, I see thieves having to endure a lot of dangers that other classes and races and players just won't. They're often put up front with a torch trying to be the scout because they have the ability to see traps. You're the one facing dangers and trying to hear noise. A referee might take that opportunity to throw a mimic door or something at you, meaning that you're the one that's going to be more likely facing that than other people. Specific kind of threat level that the magic user never fully endures, even though they probably have close to the same hit points at the same level, mind you. I think this type of thing brings the pressure of thieves to kind of want more. The bonus loot, what they take from others, maybe directly or from their actual body while they're still alive, or the ability to slip away to avoid a fight versus going down with the rest of everyone. My point is, thieves play a high risk, high reward game. And if you're going to play a thief and you're going to have all these things in there, I think they should get the benefits. They should be the, per se, man when it comes to these type of things. And that should be what they are good at and known for. And it shouldn't be necessarily a slight, because when the fighter does it, it's still cool. But the thief just does it regularly and more often, if that makes sense. Anyways, guys, did I get this wrong? Did I get this right? Let me know in the comments down below what you would do differently. Thank you and have a great day, and keep rolling those dice. Bye.